They sentenced Mara Vale to winter without a coat. On the town books, it was called Exile. In the North Mountains, everyone knew the real name for it: execution. The strangest part was not the iron bar dropping behind her, it was the coat. Her own wool coat lay 10 steps away, inside the gate, half sunk in black mud. She could still see the torn cuff she had mended with blue thread. She could still see the warmth that might have kept her alive through the first night. They had not forgotten to give it back. They had chosen not to. Behind the wall, the people of Ember Hollow watched in silence. Ahead of her, the spruce forest rose in black columns, already filling with the first ash-gray flakes of late October snow. Mara pressed one hand to her ribs, where a dull skinning knife and a cracked fire steel had been shoved beneath her shirt at the last second. 2 objects: no food, no blanket, no mercy. And somewhere behind that locked gate, the person who had burned the winter storehouse was standing warm among the innocent. 2 nights earlier, the north granary had gone up like a torch. By dawn, the stone floor was buried under gray ash. The long bins of oats, beans, barley, salt pork, and seed corn had collapsed into a smoking wound in the center of town. 37 families had depended on that building. There were 26 days left before the mountain pass usually sealed shut. Without the granary, Ember Hollow would not make it cleanly to spring. Fear needed a face. Mayor Harlan Voss gave it one. Mara Vale was dragged into the square with rope around her wrists, and soot still streaked across her cheeks from trying to fight the fire. She was 25, broad-shouldered from cutting wood, solitary since her father died of lung fever, and unpopular because she had a habit of saying what richer people preferred to hide. The mayor stood on the chapel steps in his black overcoat, one hand on the brass chain of his watch. "You were seen leaving the granary," he said. "I was seen running toward it," Mara answered. Her voice was scraped raw from smoke. "Half of you saw me carrying water." A few faces shifted. Voss felt that shift and crushed it quickly. "You asked this council for timber last week," he said. "We denied it. You accused us of caring more about ledgers than lives. And then the town's food burned." Mara pulled against the rope. "Because the roof leaked. Because the north wall was rotten. Because you were warned to line it with stone before the first frost." The crowd murmured. There it was. The reason he needed her gone. If the town remembered that warning, they would stop looking at Mara and start looking at him. Then Lisa Marrow stepped out of the crowd. She was the miller's niece, wrapped in a clean brown shawl, pale-faced and shaking in exactly the way frightened people expected honesty to shake. "I saw her," Lisa said. Mara went still. Lisa did not look at her. "Near midnight, at the granary door. She had a lantern in one hand and a sack in the other. When she saw me, she ran." A sound went through the square, low and hungry. Mara understood in a single cold flash. 3 days before the fire, she had found Lisa in the granary with 2 flour sacks hidden under a tarp. Mara had promised to report it after morning service. Lisa had not waited for morning. She had burned the evidence, then handed the blame to the only woman who had seen her steal. "Look at me," Mara said. "Lisa, look at me and say it again." Lisa's mouth trembled. Mayor Voss lifted his hand. "Enough!" Elder Bram, who owned the largest herd in the valley and never fed anyone for free, stepped beside him. "The old law is plain. Whoever threatens the winter store threatens every child in this town." "The old law says trial by council," Mara snapped. Voss looked out over the starving future of Ember Hollow and saw how easily panic could become obedience. "The council has heard enough. The sentence came fast. No hanging, no cell, no chance to gather her father's tools from the cabin at the creek. Exile beyond the north gate. They cut the rope from her wrists only after they had stripped away her coat, her belt pouch, and the heavy mittens her father had made from deer hide. Sheriff Elias Rusk held her by one arm as the crowd parted. Elias had known her father. He had once shared a winter trapline with him. He did not meet Mara's eyes until they reached the gate. Then, as the guards lifted the beam, his fingers pressed something hard against her side. Her father's skinning knife. A fire steel with a cracked handle. "Keep moving east until you find a cut bank," he muttered. "The wind comes from the west tonight." Mara stared at him, his jaw clenched. "I can't stop them." "No," she said, "you won't." Pain crossed his face, but the gate was already opening. A shove sent her stumbling into the rutted snow beyond the palisade. The gate slammed. The iron beam dropped. The last sound Ember Hollow gave her was wood closing against wood. Mara stood there shivering so hard her teeth struck together. She could have screamed until her throat split. She could have begged. She could have thrown herself against the gate and called every name she had ever known. But the sky was darkening. The wind was turning sharp, and tears would freeze before they helped. So Mara looked once at her coat sinking into the mud on the safe side of the wall. Then she turned toward the trees. The first night tried to kill her, honestly. There was no drama in it, no wolves circling, no thunder cracking over the mountains. Just cold, steady, and intimate, working its fingers under her shirt, into her boots, between her ribs. She walked because standing still meant dying. Branches clawed her face. Frozen mud sucked at her heels. Twice she fell. The second time she stayed on her hands and knees too long, mesmerized by how soft the moss looked beneath a lace of frost. Sleep, her body suggested. Mara bit the inside of her cheek until blood filled her mouth. Not yet. Near dawn, she found the cut bank Elias had mentioned, a shoulder of earth carved by a narrow creek with spruce roots hanging like black ropes from the frozen soil. It faced south. The bank broke the western wind. It was not shelter, not yet, but it was a place where shelter might be bullied into existence. Her hands barely worked. She broke dead twigs, stripped curls of birch bark with the knife, and struck the fire steel until sparks hissed and vanished. Once, twice, 100 times. Her knuckles split. Blood dotted the snow in small, dark stars. The first real spark caught in a shred of bark. Mara bent over it, breathing as if she were convincing a newborn animal to stay alive. Smoke crawled up. A thread of flame followed. She fed it slivers, then twigs, then wrist-thick branches until the fire became large enough to be believed. Only then did she shake. Not from cold. From rage. By the second day, rage was not enough. Hunger moved into her belly like a second creature. Mara chewed frozen rose hips, dug grubs from a rotten log, and boiled spruce needles in a bark bowl using hot stones from the fire. The tea tasted like bitterness and sap, but her father's voice came back to her clearly. Green needles keep a body from rotting inside when meat is gone. Her father had taught her everything in fragments. How to read rabbit tracks after sleet. How to tell dry deadfall from wood that only looked dry. How to build a snare then check it before the fox did. He had taught her because he feared a hard year. He had not known the hard year would be people. For 11 days, Mara turned the cut bank into a den. She dug into the frozen earth with a sharpened branch and a flat stone until her shoulders burned. She packed the walls with mud, roots, and moss. She cut saplings with the little knife, each trunk taking so long her hands cramped around the handle. She laid them overhead, wove spruce boughs across them, then buried the roof in needles and earth until the whole structure disappeared into the bank. Inside, she scraped a shallow fire pit and punched a smoke tunnel upward with a green pole. The first time smoke drew cleanly through the tunnel instead of choking the den, Mara laughed once, a rough sound that frightened a raven from the branches above. It was low, dark, dirty, and hers. But shelter only slowed death. Food had to be taken. Mara unraveled threads from the tail of her shirt and braided them into snares. The first 3 snapped. The next 4 caught nothing. On the 5th morning, she found one pulled tight around a snowshoe hare. The animal kicked weakly. Mara knelt in the snow, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she killed it cleanly. That night, the meat hissed over the fire, and the smell almost broke her. She ate slowly because her stomach had shrunk, saving the liver, boiling the bones, stretching the hide on willow twigs. Nothing could be wasted. Waste belonged to people behind walls. On the 18th day, the forest changed its terms. Mara was following a line of old marten tracks along a ravine when she slipped through a crust of snow and landed hard among collapsed poles. At first she thought she had found deadfall. Then she saw the shape beneath it: squared timbers, half-rotted canvas, a rusted stove ring, an old charcoal burner's camp. She tore into it with the desperation of a starving animal. Under the blackened canvas, she found a dented tin pot. Under a fallen shelf, 6 fish hooks sealed in a scrap of oiled cloth. Beneath a pile of punky wood, she pulled out a short-handled axe with a split grip and a blade orange with rust. Mara sat back in the snow, clutching the axe to her chest. For the first time since the gate closed, the forest did not feel like a judge. It felt like an opponent that had made a mistake. For 2 days, she worked the axe edge against creek stone until the rust gave way to metal. After that, everything changed. Wood came faster. The den grew stronger. She built a real door from split cedar and pegged it with sharpened bone. She made a drying rack high between 2 trees and kept a slow smoke under strips of rabbit, squirrel, and small trout pulled from holes in the creek ice. She used the hooks with sinew line. She used the tin pot for broth. She used the axe for every task that had once stolen half a day from her. Her cheeks hollowed, her hair tangled, her palms became hard as bark. She stitched rabbit skins into mittens and a lopsided vest. She stopped flinching at the dark. Then, in the last week of November, the mountain inhaled. The birds vanished first. Not quieted, vanished. The sky turned a flat green gray. The air became so still, the smoke from her den rose straight up and stood there. Every old lesson in Mara's blood woke at once. Whiteout. She spent the next hour moving like a woman who had no spare seconds left. Wood inside, meat inside, pot filled with snow, door braced, smoke tunnel cleared, snares abandoned. Everything that mattered pulled underground. When the storm hit, it did not fall. It arrived sideways. Snow struck the cedar door like thrown gravel. Wind clawed across the roof, searching for weakness. The spruce trees groaned above her, deep and wooden, like ships breaking in a black sea. Mara sat beside the fire with the axe across her knees. The den held. For 5 days the world was sound and darkness. She rationed meat into strips the size of 2 fingers. She melted snow. She slept in pieces. Once something heavy crashed overhead, and dirt sifted from the ceiling onto her face, but the roof did not fail. On the 6th morning, silence pressed against the door. Mara pushed. Nothing moved. Snow had sealed her in. For one breath, the old panic returned. Not the panic of death in the open, but death by burial, slow and stupid, inside the shelter she had built to save herself. Then she picked up the axe. It took nearly 3 hours to cut an angled passage through the packed drift. When she broke the surface, sunlight blinded her. The forest had become a white ocean. Spruce tips stuck out like drowned masts. The cold was deep enough to burn the lungs, but the sky was blue and pitiless. Mara stood in the glare, wearing fur she had made with her own hands, holding an axe she had stolen back from Rust. And then she saw the red cloth. A small scrap of crimson, snagged on a broken branch near the creek ridge. Color did not belong in that much white. She went low, one hand on the axe, and followed it. 20 yards beyond the ridge, 2 bodies lay half buried in the drift. One was a boy, maybe 17, his lashes crusted with ice. The red cloth had torn from his scarf. Mara knew him. Noah Marrow, Lisa's younger brother. The other body was Sheriff Elias Rusk. For a moment, the forest became very quiet inside her. "Leave them," said the part of her that had learned the language of hunger. Noah's sister had helped murder her. Elias had opened the gate. The town had watched her coat rot in mud and called it justice. She could turn away. She could let winter finish the work Ember Hollow had begun. Then Elias's coat shifted, and Mara saw the empty sheath at his belt. He had given her the knife. Not enough mercy to save his soul, maybe. Enough to save her life. Mara cursed so loudly a clump of snow dropped from a branch. Then she cut spruce poles. She built a drag sled from boughs and rawhide strips. She lashed the 2 men onto it, wrapped their faces, and leaned into the rope until it bit through her fur mittens. The trip back to the den became a private war. Every step sank, every breath scraped. Twice the sled tipped. Once Mara fell and did not rise until she imagined Lisa sleeping warm because she had been too weak to stand. No, she got up. By dusk she dragged them through the tunnel and into the den. She stripped their frozen coats and boots, wrapped them in hides, packed warm stones near their sides, and fed the fire until sweat ran down her back. She melted snow in the tin pot and boiled the last of her fish with spruce tips and hair fat. Drop by drop, she worked broth between their cracked lips. Noah woke first, sobbing without sound. Elias woke after midnight. His eyes rolled toward the dirt ceiling, then toward the fire, then toward Mara, crouched in fur and smoke with an axe beside her hand. "Mara," he rasped. She did not smile. "You found the East Cut Bank," he said. "I found a lot more than that." Over the next 2 days, the truth came out in broken pieces. Ember Hollow was starving. The storm had buried the road, shattered 2 roofs, and frozen the mill wheel solid. With the granary gone, the mayor had seized private stores for fair rationing. Fair meant his supporters ate twice. Fair meant his locked cellar under the council hall stayed full. Fair meant children were fainting in church while Harlan Voss kept bacon and cornmeal behind a guarded door. Then Lysa had broken. When her own family was cut to crusts and bean water, guilt finally did what courage had not. She confessed in the chapel, in front of half the town. She said she stole from the granary. She said Mara caught her. She said the fire was meant to hide the theft, not burn the town. Voss called her fever mad. Then he locked her in the old records room. Noah and Elias had gone out through a drainage gap to hunt, not for the mayor, for the families he was starving. The blizzard caught them before they found the creek. Elias stared at the smoked meat hanging from Mara's ceiling, at the stacked hides, at the door, at the tools. They sent you out with nothing, he said.
Not nothing.
His eyes moved to the knife. Shame bent his face. Mara, people are dying. The words sat between them like a coal. Mara looked around the den. This place had cost her skin, blood, hunger, and fear. It was the first home that had never asked her to shrink. Ember Hollow had thrown her away. She owed it nothing. But she remembered the children in the square. She remembered old Nessa, who had slipped bread into her hand after her father's funeral. She remembered that cruelty spread fastest when decent people decided survival gave them permission to become small. Then we leave at first light, Mara said. Noah stared at her. You'll come back? Mara reached for the axe. No, she said. I'll arrive. They took 2 days to reach Ember Hollow. Mara broke the trail on rawhide snowshoes she had woven during the storm. Behind her, Elias and Noah pushed a sled loaded with smoked meat, frozen fish, rendered fat packed in bark cups, bundles of hides, and a tin pot tied down with sinew. The palisade appeared at dawn, pale and crooked through the blowing ice crystals. For a while, no one answered the gate. Then a woman screamed from the watch step. By the time the beam lifted, half the town had gathered behind it. They looked less like villagers than shadows wearing clothes, cheeks sunken, lips split, eyes too large. Even the men who had shouted loudest at Mara's sentencing now stared at her as if they were seeing something climb out of a grave. She stepped through the gate, wearing stitched fur, an axe at her belt, her father's knife at her side, and the winter all over her. Someone whispered, "It's her." Mayor Harlan Voss forced his way through the crowd. He had lost weight, but not enough. His coat was still buttoned over a full belly. Grease shone at one corner of his mouth. For half a second, he looked afraid. Then habit rescued him. "Seize her," he barked. "She is banished. No exile crosses this gate." No one moved. The villagers were staring at the sled. Mara pulled the hide cover back. Smoked meat, fish, fat, hides, enough not to save the whole winter, but enough to prove the mayor had lied about what one person could do. The silence broke into a raw, collective sound. Not joy. Need. Elias stepped forward. Harlan Voss accused an innocent woman to bury his own negligence. Lisa Marrow confessed to the fire. Voss locked her away and hid food while you starved. The mayor spun on him. "You treacherous fool." Noah's voice cracked, but it carried. "I saw the cellar. Salt pork, meal barrels, 3 sacks of beans. He had guards on it." The crowd changed. Hunger had made them weak, but truth gave the weakness direction. Voss saw it. His hand disappeared beneath his coat and came out gripping a stove hook, black iron and heavy at the end. He lunged for Mara. 3 months earlier, he might have frightened her. Now he moved like a man who had never chased his dinner through snow. Mara stepped aside. The hook cut empty air. She caught his wrist, turned under his arm, and drove him face first into the packed snow. Before he could rise, the edge of her axe rested against the fur collar beneath his chin. The square froze. Voss stared up at her, breath steaming, eyes wide with the sudden knowledge that walls and titles did not matter this close to a blade. Mara leaned down. "You left me to be judged by the snow," she said quietly. "The snow found me innocent." She held him there long enough for every starving person to see what power looked like without a podium. Then she lifted the axe. "Open the cellar," she said. No one waited for Voss to agree. The council hall doors were broken down within minutes. The cellar came open to shouting, then silence, then rage. Barrels of meal, sides of pork, beans, dried apples, food enough to have kept children on their feet while the mayor preached sacrifice from a warm room. Mara did not watch what they did with him. She went to the records room and broke the lock. Lysa Marrow was inside, feverish and hollow-eyed. When she saw Mara, she slid down the wall and covered her face. "I killed you," Lysa whispered. Mara looked at the woman who had taken her name, her home, and nearly her life. "No," Mara said. "Winter tried. You only helped it." Lysa sobbed. Mara left her there for her own people to judge. In the square, the food was being divided under Elias's command. Old Nessa pressed both hands to Mara's face and cried. Children reached for strips of fish with shaking fingers. Men who had once shouted for exile could not meet her eyes. Someone brought Mara's wool coat. It had been cleaned. The blue thread still marked the cuff. For a long moment, Mara looked at it. Then she handed it to a girl whose shoulders were shaking beneath a torn shawl. "It fits you better now," Mara said. Elias came to her at the gate. "You could stay," he said. "They'll listen to you now." Behind him, Ember Hollow was breaking open its own lies. The palisade looked smaller than Mara remembered. Not safer, just smaller. She looked past it to the black spruce, the white ridges, the cut bank hidden beyond the creek. She thought of the den's low fire, the smoke tunnel drawing clean, the drying rack between the trees. She thought of silence that did not accuse her, hunger that told the truth, cold that killed without pretending to be righteous. "No," she said. Elias nodded as if he had known. Mara stepped through the open gate carrying the axe, the knife, and nothing that belonged to Ember Hollow. At the tree line, she turned once. "Rebuild the granary in stone, and next time you need someone to blame, start with the warmest room." Then she walked into the spruce shadow. The town watched until a forest took her. They had sent Mara Vale into winter as a sentence. Winter returned her as a verdict.